Welcome to the Kennedy Report, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a minute since we've done a live stream. Thank you for all your prayers regarding my wife and the baby. We had a little baby girl named Clementine. Her name is Clementine Joyanne Hall. Beautiful, perfect little angel child. You have to say that, right? I mean, yes, she's screaming and crying through the night and changing a lot of diapers, but nonetheless, you wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you to everyone who's been so supportive of the channel, and it's good to be back with you live. I wish there were better news to talk about than what we're going to talk about. But it appears that Cardinal Cupich has nuked the Latin Mass, or is nuking the Latin Mass in the Chicago Diocese. This is something that a lot of people speculated would happen. It's not necessarily a big surprise. But nonetheless, it's something that's happening, and he's going after the Institute of Christ the King. And one of the reasons why this is so significant, it's not the fact that a very liberal cleric is going after tradition. That's just like saying the sun rises in the morning. It's just something that happens. But what's stunning about this is that, thanks, Mike says, looking good for running on no sleep. I have had a few naps in the last 2 weeks, so it's not no sleep. Definitely more than my wife, poor woman. But in any case, Marcel Lefebvre predicted exactly what would happen. And not just a general prediction like, you know, they're going to come after your traditional mass. It was much more than that. We're going to get to that as we go. First, we need a little bit of background, though, on what has actually happened. So I have an article here that you can see. I'll actually make this full screen so you can see this better. How's the best way to do it? What's the best way? This way? This way. There you go. So I'll make it a little bit larger here so everyone can read that with me. A little class read along. And this is from an article from LifeSite. Cardinal Cupich strongly rumored to be planning to remove community of Latin Mass priests from Chicago. If he's going to be doing this for one of them, you know, he's going to be coming after the rest of them. It's not as if he's going to say, get out of here. Well, actually, we'll go over why he might leave some of them there. And why that's actually not a good thing, considering the stipulations of it, which Lefebvre did predict. It was a prophecy of his. And LifeSite News has learned from Keith Armato, a leading Catholic layman, close to the situation, that the Archbishop of Chicago had demanded for months that the Institute signs a document with 5 or 6 points. Among the points they had to sign, each priest individually, was that the Novus Ordo rite is the only true expression of the Roman rite. This formulation stems directly from Pope Francis's own document, Traditionis Custodes, an explanation that makes it clear that the traditional Roman rite has to disappear altogether. Moreover, the Institute was also asked to accept a procedure, according to which the priests of the Institute have to ask Cardinal Cupich for permission to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass, and that he might grant it for 2 years, but that he also could revoke that permission at any given time. So just to summarize there, priests, individual priest, each priest individually has to sign a document with 5 or 6 points saying that the Novus Ordo is the best mass and stamp it, locked it, can't erase it, and that they have to ask for permission to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass, and that it might also be revoked at any time. Okay. This is not anything new, and in fact, this was something that Marcel Lefebvre warned about in 1990, after the indult. Okay, so if you don't know what the indult is, real quick, the indult Mass has been called the insult Mass. So basically, after the traditional Mass was not technically canceled in an official sense, but sort of suppressed, let's say, you couldn't celebrate it. I mean, you get in a lot of trouble if you did. So basically, they put together a situation under John Paul II where you could request permission to say the traditional Latin Mass if the bishop decided to give it to you. Okay, so this was called the indult Mass. And here is a document from the SSPX website, and it's going over Marcel Lefebvre's comments on this and what they meant in context. And this is from after Summorum Pontificum, I think, so after the Latin Mass was liberated to a degree. And it says, by the decree Quatuor Abinc Annos of October 3rd, 1984, the Congregation for Divine Worship gave bishops the faculty to grant. This is so crazy. We're going to break down why. Gave bishops the faculty to grant an indult for the celebration of Mass according to the 1962 Missal. Keep in mind that in 2007, Pope Benedict XVI said the Latin Mass was never abrogated, so it was never done away with. But apparently, even though that was the case, and remember, Benedict was the head of the Congregation for Divine Worship, or Congregation for Doctrine of the Faith, head of the CDF, basically the head of doctrine in the world, basically. In any case, at that time, Benedict was in charge of that, and 20 years later, Benedict says the Latin Mass was never canceled. Anyway, that's all their story. But basically, bishops were given the faculty to grant an indult for the celebration of Mass according to the 1962 Missal, provided that certain conditions be respected. The first one, and we'll see this document in a second here, required that the celebrant and the faithful hearing the Mass in no way share the positions of those who call in question the legitimacy and doctrinal exactitude of the Roman Missal promulgated by Paul VI in 1970. What's hilarious about that, what's interesting about that, is that the Church herself has called into question the doctrinal exactitude of the Roman Missal, because that's why it's been updated, because they said, ooh, it shouldn't say, for all, it should say for many, and other sort of things like that. There have been various translations in different countries that have been kind of a disaster. There have been lots of times where the actual authorities themselves have called into question the doctrinal exactitude of the Roman Missal, at least as it's been promulgated. So even this statement itself contradicts what the Church herself has done. Anyway, that's all their story. But what is this document they're talking about? When you read this document, it is one of the most, there's a reason why they called it the insult Mass. It is one of the most insulting things you could ever read as far as what has been done to traditional Catholics. And I have that open right here. And, okay, so just take this in for a second. If you've never read this, this is a doozy. This is a doozy. So this is indult for the use of the Roman Missal of 1962, Congregation for Divine Worship. This is a copy of the text. Okay. So it starts off. 4 years ago, by order of the Supreme Pontiff John Paul II, the bishops of the whole Church were invited to present a report concerning the way in which the priests and faithful of their diocese had received the Missal, promulgated in 1970 by the authority of Pope Paul VI in accordance with the decision of the Second Vatican Council. Vatican II did not appear in the Second Vatican Council, so I don't know what they're talking about there. Or New Mass, did not appear in Vatican II. So people say the New Mass is from Vatican II. It's not from Vatican II. That's just not a thing. You will not find a document in the documents of the Second Vatican Council to tell you that there is a New Mass. That's not a thing. There were liturgical recommendations. We could debate those. But the New Mass is not part of the Second Vatican Council. You don't find it in the Council. This is what's so maddening people talk about. I mean, it's gaslighting from the beginning. This is the Mass of Vatican II. It's definitely the Mass of the Spirit of Vatican II, but it's not the Mass of Vatican II. Again, we can debate whether or not the documents from Vatican II were prudent, whether they, whether Sacrosanctum Concilium, the document on liturgy, was written in a way that was exact enough. Okay, fine, you can debate that. That's a worthy debate. But the Second Vatican Council did not promulgate a liturgy. Anyway. Concerning the difficulties arising in the implementation of the liturgical reform, why would it be so difficult if it was so organic? Concerning possible resistance that may have arisen. The result of the consultation was sent to all bishops. On the basis of their replies, it appeared that the problem of priests and faithful holding to the so-called Tridentine rite was almost completely solved. Oh my goodness, this is crazy. So the problem of priests and faithful holding to the so-called Tridentine rite. You know what's interesting about this? I agree. It shouldn't be called, it should be called the Mass of Pius V, maybe. But look at this. They say it's wrong to call it the Tridentine rite. So-called. It's so-called. You can't call it that. But here they say, here they conflate the Mass of 1970 with Vatican II. Now, they're correct to conflate them because that was the justification used. But then when you go down here, apparently it's the so-called Tridentine Rite, but it literally was a missal that was codified after the reforms at Trent, which is where Tridentine comes from, Tridentine. So if the Mass of Vatican, if the new Mass is a Vatican II inspired thing, if it is, then the old Mass is a Tridentine inspired thing. So it's just, it's doublespeak. It's duplicitous. It's speaking out of both sides of the mouth. It's confusing. There's other things I could show, but anyway, I'll get too much into the weeds. Since, however, it's amazing how they talk to traditionalists here, or about them. Since, however, the same problem continues, those pesky trads, the Supreme Pontiff, in a desire to meet the wishes of these groups, grants to diocesan bishops the possibility of using an indult whereby priests and faithful, who shall be expressly indicated in the letter of request to be presented to their own bishop, may be able to celebrate Mass by using the Roman Missal according to the 1962 edition, but under the following conditions. Oh, so wonderful. Honestly, you know, some people say that I'm too hard on John Paul II. This all happened under John Paul II. Faithful Catholics were treated like trash under his pontificate. It's just a fact. So anyway, here's the conditions: that it may be publicly, that it be made publicly clear beyond all ambiguity that such priests and their respective faithful in no way share the positions of those who call in question the legitimacy and doctrinal exactitude of the Roman Missal promulgated by Pope Paul VI in 1970. This is an impossible, and this is the crux of the whole thing, this is an impossible thing to hold. Let's read this again. It says, it be made publicly clear. How can it be made publicly clear? Think about that for a sec. How could you make it publicly clear that a priest celebrating the traditional Mass doesn't hold certain views you don't like? That's crazy. Publicly clear beyond all ambiguity. It's impossible to be beyond all ambiguity for what they're asking for, as we'll see here. That such priests and their respective faithful, how could you make sure that the faithful, like you have a parish that's open for Mass, people show up to go to Mass. How on earth could it be made clear that the faithful, there's no possible juridical way to do this. This is complete, insane, tyrannical, nonsensical abuse of power. Like, you have to make sure that it's publicly known that the parishioners that walk into your parish for your 3 p.m. Sunday afternoon Latin Mass that they allow you to have don't share the positions of those who call into question the legitimacy and doctrinal exactitude of the Roman Missal. What's hilarious about that is that almost all trads that went to these indult masses had missals printed by Angelus Press. So, I don't know, which is the SSPX's publisher. Anyway, it says, such celebration, I'll continue though. Sorry, I should go back here for a sec though. If you're a priest who's requesting the use of the traditional Mass, you're clearly not somebody, like, even if you think the new Mass is still fine in some circumstances or can be done right, by the fact that you think that the faithful deserve the traditional Mass, you de facto share some of the positions of those who resisted the new Mass, because they also believed that the faithful deserved the traditional Mass. Do you see the problem here? This was doomed to fail from the beginning. And this logic here of this permission to be traditional, even though it's not technically the same thing with the Fraternity of St. Peter, Institute of Christ the King, the same logic applies, which is why you're now seeing this spirit of anti-traditionalism, anti-restorationism. That's the new term everyone likes, restorationist. Okay, fine, I like it. It's a good term. This spirit of anti-traditionalism is seen in how Cupich is nuking the Institute of Christ the King in his diocese, because these bishops who don't like tradition still see everything as an indult. Because in a way it is, especially with the recent document from Francis last year. In any case, it says such celebration must be made only for the benefit of those groups that request it. Talk about a church of inclusivity. Talk about a pastoral church. Only those who request it. So does that mean that if you put on a Latin Mass in the 1980s and 90s, you're not supposed to advertise it? People get freaked out about Pope Francis's recent document, Traditionis Custodes, as if that's somehow shocking. This came out under Pope John Paul II. As far as traditionalists are concerned, John Paul II was probably worse to them than Pope Francis. Such celebration must be made only for the benefit of those groups that request it in churches and oratories indicated by the bishop, not, however, in parish churches, unless the bishop permits it in an extraordinary case. Does this sound like Pope Francis? This is under JP2. This was written by prefect. Anyway, this was under John Paul II. Pope Francis is just continuing what John Paul II did. This is just a fact. This is not calumny. Goodness gracious, I've had some people say, how dare you bring up that John Paul II did those things? And it's like, he did them. It's a matter of historical record. What are you supposed to do? Pretend history is not history? In any case, and on the days and under the conditions fixed by the bishop, either habitually in individual cases. These celebrations must be in accord with 1962 Missal. Okay, fine. There must be no interchanging of texts and rites of the two missals. That's kind of interesting. Each bishop must inform its congregation of the concessions granted by him, and at the end of the year from the granting of this indult, he must report on the results of its application. And listen how they try to make this so pastoral. This concession, indicative of the common father's solicitude for all his children, actually that's not even true, because look, it can't be made for anyone except for those in the group that request it. Oh, but sorry, it's solicitude for all his children. Must be used in such a way as to not prejudice the faithful observance of the liturgical reform in the life of the respective ecclesial communities, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's the document that Lefebvre was talking about. And here's what Lefebvre said. Now, that letter was not written by Cardinal Ratzinger, but there was another letter written about permission for the Latin Mass later on. Anyway, Lefebvre says, I'll make this bigger. This is, I think it was 1990. Where is it? There we go. And that's big enough there. He says, Cardinal Ratzinger's letter implies that the Holy Father may be getting ready to authorize by decree the official public celebration of the Tridentine Rite. But the religious authorities would only grant this freedom on condition that the traditional Mass must not be celebrated out of contempt for the new rite. They would require priests to say the new Mass at least once in a while. This is true. It is difficult not to decry. It's difficult not to decry in the arrangement of the conditions a maneuver destined to put pressure on traditional priests to convince them to celebrate the new Mass. Let's just take that into account here. This is like 40 years ago, 35 years ago. This was a maneuver destined to put pressure on traditional priests to convince them to celebrate the new Mass. Okay. Availing ourselves of the indult is tantamount to putting ourselves into a state of contradiction, because at the same time that Rome gives the Fraternity of St. Peter, for example, or Le Barreau Abbey, and other groups authorization to say the Mass of all time, they also require young priests to sign a profession of faith, this is true, in which the spirit of the council must be accepted. It is a contradiction. The spirit of the council is embodied in the new Mass. How is it possible to desire to preserve the Mass of all time while accepting the spirit that destroys the Mass of all time? It is completely contradictory. And this is the part here. This is the money line from Marcel Lefebvre. Just before I get to that there. Like and subscribe this video. Seriously. But anyway. The term prophecy gets thrown around a lot with weird, wacky, false apparitions today, okay? But to prophesy means basically two things. One is to predict the future. Another is to say things that need to be said that nobody else is saying. So the prophets of the Old Testament, not testaments, of the Old Testament, sometimes you see them like Daniel, literally being like X, Y, and Z is going to happen, and it happens to the day, right? It's like, or to the week or the month or whatever in that era. That's a prophecy. That's predicting something in the future that will come. But another way of predicting what will come in the future is by saying the hidden truth that nobody else will say because they don't have the courage to do it. That's also what a prophet is. This is why John the Baptist, I don't think that John the Baptist makes predictions in the long form sense we see. I might be mistaken on that, but I can't think of any. But we know John the Baptist is a prophet because John the Baptist calls out the hidden evil going on and brings it to light. That's how he's prophetic. And that, in a way, is actually a prediction. Because when you call out, it's like, I've been saying for a while that I believe Justin Trudeau is going to call an election. And not because I have some clairvoyance about it. And now it's coming out that it looks like he's going to do it in the fall, according to all the insiders and so forth. But the reason is just I know what's going on in the political scene. I know how bad things are. I know the investigations going on. And I'm like, the only way out of this is for this evil man to do something to get out of the pickle he's in. And that could be an election. In a sense, that's prophetic in a very mundane sense, because all I'm saying is I know what's going to happen because it's the only way this mechanism can operate. So Lefebvre here is predicting what's going to happen in the future. We'll get to the exact money quote here in a sec. But he is also, well, yes, Mark, our friend, says that he will increase, I must decrease. This is definitely a general. I'm talking more about sort of Daniel type. Yeah, and Mike McCann can say, behold the Lamb of God, for sure. Yeah, I'm just sort of saying a more Daniel thing. I'm just sort of trying to give a background on prophecy here, because some people are going to say, this isn't a prophecy. No, this is a prophecy. Because this is an apostle. Marcel Lefebvre is an apostle. He's a bishop. He's an archapostle. He's an archbishop. And he's calling out like Paul. He's calling out like St. Paul what Peter is doing that's wrong. And here's the money quote, okay? He says it's completely contradictory. And listen here. One day, very gently, they will oblige those who have been granted the use of the Tridentine Mass, the Mass of all time, also to accept the new Mass. And they will tell them that it is simply a matter of squaring themselves with what they have signed, since they signed a statement that they accepted the spirit of the Council and its reforms. You cannot put yourself thus into an unbelievable, irrational contradiction. It is a very uncomfortable situation. This is what has created the difficulty for these groups that have signed it and that currently find themselves in a kind of impasse. What happened with the instituted Christ the King? And this is just the beginning. This isn't going to stop with Cupich. Are you kidding me? He's the trendsetter. The Appletini bishops are kind of fashionistas in that way. They like to set trends. He says, this is what happened in... This is what it said. It was each priest individually had to sign a document saying that the Novus Ordo is a true expression of the Roman Rite. This is the exact same thing as Archbishop Lefebvre saying, one day very gently they'll be obliged to sign something saying that they accept the new Mass. And that they will sign a statement because they signed a statement saying that they accepted the spirit of the Council and its reforms. This is exactly what Archbishop Lefebvre said would happen. Cardinal Cupich is just playing out the entire logic of what was in this letter that gave the indult Mass, which, if you read it, again, look at this bloody thing. You can't say it in parishes. It literally says that. Not, however, in parish churches, unless the bishop permits an extraordinary case. That's the same thing as Traditionis Custodes. That's the same thing as what Pope Francis has said about what was that document from December? I can't remember. The one answering the dubia about Traditionis Custodes. It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. And just like Lefebvre said, they will, and I love how, and it's interesting how he says this, very gently. He understands the demonic nature behind how these serpentine actors do what they do to destroy the faith of your ancestors. The devil is very patient. So he says very gently. Well, this was done gently. Remember, LifeSite has learned that this fella, Mr. Armato, that the Archbishop of Chicago has demanded for months now that the Institute signs a document with 5 or 6 points. Was this done with any fireworks? Was this done with any crash bang? You know, my fist comes down and says, do this? No, it's done very gently. Listen, your order, and if you read the charisms, and listen, I went to a fraternity parish. I've been to a fraternity parish like 3 times. Wonderful, every single time. God bless them. When I was in Ottawa for the March for Life, I went to a 7:30 a.m. low mass, and then I went to that by myself. It's nice to go to mass by yourself when you got a bunch of little children around the house. I love my children, but going to mass with them is not always an illuminative affair. So I went to mass, and I went to the March for Life mass that day with the high mass and everything, and it was wonderful to see that. And I know someone's going to say this in the comments. No, I did not receive communion twice in the same day. I just went to mass twice. Anyway. And the priest was amazing. He was amazing. And I met some fraternity priests. They're wonderful guys. There are priests that we met at the March for Life who are from other dioceses, so they say the Novus Ordo, and they love tradition, and they wear their caskets. They're trying to figure that out, and they've fallen in love with this whole thing. These are wonderful men. Like, this isn't like a, told you so thing. But it's just, this is what Lefebvre was saying. And this is why, prophets are never accepted in their time, okay? And what he said was, the day will come when they'll be told that they have to accept the new Mass. And by accept the new Mass means not just that it's valid. Lefebvre always said that the new Mass done as a Mass is valid as long as a valid priest does the thing the way he's supposed to do. That's pretty simple. But accepting the new Mass is not the same thing. Sorry, accepting that the new Mass is valid is not the same thing as accepting the Mass as such, as a good thing in the church. And this goes back to this insult Mass, the indult Mass thing, where they say they can't have anyone thinking like those people who call into question the legitimacy. This was a direct jab at the Society of St. Pius X, because the Society of St. Pius X did not say the Mass was invalid, but that it had a illicit, which is a synonym for legitimate, meaning it was against the law to do so, because it was against the spirit of law. The spirit of law is to help save souls, and if you go against the point of the code of canon law, then you're missing the whole point. This is pharisaical, right? The letter of the law kills, and the letter killeth, and the spirit giveth life. So when you go into one of these congregations of priests, like the Fraternity Christ the King, and you see this even with, I can't remember the fellow's name, the priest who is the superior general for the fraternity. I remember a couple of years ago reading what he said about, how much he loved being the Latin Mass and things. It was made very clear. I have not heard this. Stephen, I'm gonna post this thing here in a sec. I haven't. If anyone has any answers to this, put it in the chat. But it was made very clear that the charism, at least according to the superior general of the fraternity of St. Peter, was that basically tradition was just extremely meaningful, and it was like their thing. Like it was, I'm paraphrasing. I'm not denigrating. I'm just saying it might be Father Bissig, I think. You're right. But it was basically, this is such a rich thing, and our charism is to preserve this wonderful thing because it's so great. That's really important. That's really important. But that's not going to cut it when they come and take that thing away from you that everybody needs. If you think it's just supposed to be. Anyway, so our friend Stephen here asks, did you hear anything around the financial aspects of these rumors? I have not heard anything about it. I don't know. It could be, for all I know. I don't know what's going on. In any case, so this is exactly what's happening right now. Lefebvre talked about it. He said it was a direct prophecy, direct prediction. Very gently, they will oblige those who have been granted the use of the Tridentine Mass, the Mass of all time, also to accept the new Mass. because they signed a statement that they accept the spirit of the council and its reforms. That's essentially what has been happened. That's been done. So you have no leg to stand on when they come down with the hammer and say, we're going to take your mass away or we're going to make you, we're going to make you say the new mass, even though you don't want to. You have no leg to stand on because you've already signed an agreement kind of handcuffing yourself. This is not a criticism of anyone in any order. This is not a criticism of anyone. And I don't know if every single priest who joins the fraternity or Christ the King has to sign it. I'm just saying this was what was part of the inception of these orders, is that they had to make it very clear that they were not the SSPX. Basically. That they were not actually resisting, because it wasn't their thing, but that's fine. That's for other people. We just love tradition, so we're just really grateful for this. And another thing that's really interesting about this, if you read this disastrous letter that starts off with, we thought literally, the Tridentine problem was almost completely solved, but it wasn't. Since the problem continues, the Supreme Pontiff and a desire to meet the wishes of these groups, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so what did Pope Benedict say I'm going to open this up here. Pope Benedict says in 2007, this is Summorum Pontificum, and he says in here, let's do a quick Control F search. He says, make this bigger. He says, it is therefore permitted to celebrate the sacrifice of the Mass following the typical edition of the Roman Missal, which was promulgated by Blessed John the 23rd in 1962 and never abrogated. And the conditions for its use in this missal laid down by the previous document, which I just read, are now replaced. Anyway. This also wasn't a full freedom of the Latin Mass, by the way, because he basically says here that you can say the traditional Mass whenever you want. You may do so on any day, with the exception of Easter. For such a celebration with either missal, the priest needs to know permission. Anyway, my point is, Benedict XVI says the Latin Mass was never abrogated. This is his decision as Pope. But when he was head of the Congregation for Doctrine of the Faith under John Paul II, it was a completely different story. The way he dealt with Marcel Lefebvre was as if the Latin Mass was abrogated. Marcel Lefebvre was told many times, just say the Latin Mass. Or sorry, just say the new Mass once. And you'll be fine. So, in conclusion here, I'm going to close off here in a second if there's no more questions. If there are any questions, let me know within a few seconds here. Otherwise, I'm going to log off. And expect more of this. I'm not a doomsday guy. People know me. People complain that I'm too positive. Sorry about that. I'm sorry I'm not always negative. Someone here asks, is the SSPX compromised? No. They don't preach against the new Mass or Vatican II like they used to. First of all, you couldn't even make that statement because there's like 700 SSPX priests around the world. You don't go to every Mass every Sunday, so you have no idea if that's the case. Also, it's not necessary to preach against Vatican II to be a society priest. The point of being a priest is to get souls to heaven. So if it is relevant, one of the things that's funny of attending an SSPX chapel, I actually rarely have ever heard my priests publicly or from the pulpit criticize a bishop or the Pope ever. It like really literally never comes up. I mean, if you ask questions about what's going on with this and this, they'll give you an answer that is sufficient. But because they're not there to make you angry about Vatican II, they're there to help you become a saint, to go to heaven, and you don't need to resent a council to become a saint. Stephen says, always hopeful. Yes, I know. It's one of those virtues. It's wrong. I forgot, and I'm making fun of my fellow trads here, though, but it's not faith, despair, and charity. It's faith, hope, and charity. If you're not hopeful, what are you doing? Someone says, what do you make of this where Peter is claim? I don't make anything of it because that place is insane. Anyway, so there you go. Latin Mass under attack again. Story's old as time. Last thing I'll say here. It was always going to be the case. It was always going to be the case that this was going to happen. Okay? They were not going to allow tradition to keep growing. Like these men of Francis's era and a little bit younger, they are the Vatican II crowd. Like they were all ordained as Novus Ordo priests. They're all 70 years old or so now. They went to seminary and grew up as in traditional homes and made the decision to go to the Novus Ordo seminary. Now, that doesn't mean they did that because they loved the Novus Ordo. Many of them were faithful. But what I'm saying is these men who have got to the position where they're playing along now have been playing along the whole time and have been supportive of the Spirit of Vatican II thing the whole time. They've devoted their lives to it. They're not going to let it just go away. It's not going to happen. They're not going to say, well, we put all those felt banners up and we got rid of all those statues and we destroyed our parishes and dioceses, but we're just going to give up on our ideology now. That's not how it works. They're going to follow this thing through to the end. And that's going to end in their demise because the Latin Mass, the tradition, not just the Latin Mass, the tradition of the church. Because this is the thing. Lefebvre, for example, said the 1965 sort of hybrid missal because he understood that liturgical reform is totally legitimate. And there are reasons to reform liturgy. And I'm sure one day in our lifetime, when we see the restoration of tradition kind of across the board, I'm sure we'll see organic reforms because those always happen. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not just about the Mass. It's about the faith. And whatever the new Mass is, it doesn't do a good job of transmitting the faith. And it doesn't do a good job of organically fitting in with the faith that preceded it. That's the problem. Lefebvre was not against there being a new missal. He was against there being an auto-destruction of the church by forces from within. Okay? So this whole Spirit of Vatican II thing is very much a suicide mission. It's a suicide of, Pope Paul VI called it auto-destruction. Or, auto-destruction. What does that mean? That means destroying something yourself. If you destroy yourself, what is it? That's suicidal. That's a suicide. Ultimately, the end of destruction of yourself would be a suicide. So what's happening right now in the church is very much a suicidal mission. The dioceses are bleeding out. The seminaries are bleeding out. The parishes are bleeding out. The finances are bleeding out. The vocations are bleeding out. And they're just going to keep going with it. They're ideologically possessed about something. I don't know. And they were never just going to say, tradition looks like it's growing like crazy. We're just going to let that happen. They were never going to do that. So here is a challenge to traditionally minded, not just priests in traditional orders, but if you are a priest in a Novus Ordo setting, there's a really good chance, and you say the Latin Mass, or you do a traditional kind of thing. So yeah, you do the new Mass, but you got your tradition going on, you got your cassock, got some, You've got lots of statues. You're facing the altar. You're doing processions. If you're doing all that, they're going to come after you too. And if you resist, they're going to say that you have some sort of mental disorder. That's what they do. So you have to make a decision. You have to make a decision that is the faith worth you losing everything in order that your flock can gain everything? And in a practical sense, that means you can't give up the old mass, because that's the tangible thing that is being used to transmit the faith. It doesn't mean that there can only be the Latin Mass. There are traditional-minded Catholics who are in the Eastern rites. It's not about the traditional Mass per se. In the West, that's the thing that is the vehicle of the faith and always has been. Okay? So if you're a priest and you're watching this, you're going to have to make a decision soon. Like, you're going to have to make a decision. You might be prepared to be homeless. Be prepared to get on your knees and beg some wealthy benefactor to buy a chapel. I'm serious. These are things you're going to have to do. And it was always going to be this way. The Society of St. Pius X and various independent priests, they kind of acted before everybody else. But now it's here, and it's going to come for everybody. So be prepared. I see a couple questions here. I haven't read this one yet. We'll see if it's good. Isn't the problem with signing anything missing the real issue? If the spirit of the council not a concrete thing, isn't the council not infallible, not doctrinal? How to swear on it? There's lots of things in this question here, but one thing that you say that is interesting is, well, not everything in Vatican II is infallible. That's not me. That's just the fact that was said. They did not invoke the mark of infallibility, so that's just a fact. Thank you, Danny. Danny's a good guy. Go, Danny. Okay. I got to sign off here. Got a new baby. Got to go give mom a break. Going to go get a couple naps before the morning comes. Done my paternity leave. Back at work tomorrow. God bless LifeSite News. Best employer I could ever ask for in my life. Such a blessing to work for those people. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. If you want something good to read, I wrote a couple books. You can see those in the description. Press the donate link. Help us grow in our efforts. I know. Everyone wants everything for free. Not everything's free. My videos are looking pretty good. Got the nice equipment. This microphone is not, things are not free. Bunch of monitors here, lights, computer. You got to buy this stuff, right? It is what it is. And yeah. So what was I going to say? Oh yeah. Got an interesting collaboration with Casa Favilli Cigars. They're actually an awesome cigar company. They used to be called Mombacho. I have smoked their cigars many times. They're unbelievable. And I've been to Cuba 3 times, smoked Cubans in the belly of the beast. And for Americans who are shocked by that, Canadians can come and go to Cuba without, going to Guantanamo Bay or something. And so I've been there before for vacation. These Mombacho cigars from Nicaragua, I think. Called Casa Favilli. They're amazing, and so we're gonna share their stuff because it's good Catholic ownership of that company, and they're just awesome, and cigars are great. Anyway, that's all for now, and this has been the Kennedy Report, and if I find my outro here, I will say, and until next time, God bless.